Larry Wong's father came to Vancouver from China back in 1911, and he eventually earned enough money as a tailor to pay the head tax and bring his second wife to Canada. Sadly, she died when Larry was just an infant, and Larry was raised by his father in Chinatown. The youngest of 6 kids, he was mostly on his own. Dim Sum Stories is Larry's collection of childhood memories from the 40s and the 50s. And Larry bought me a tea in Chinatown recently. Then we went for a walk.
Well, we're right across from the Wing building. I remember in the old days, the original building, when you went inside, it was quite dark. I remember the floor was heavily oiled. There was a wicket down at the far end, and there would be a clerk there. And at the time I was there, it was like a travel agent. But I think in the old days, with Yip Sang, he offered a letter writing service because some of the Chinese weren't able to write letters home, like they weren't that literate. So they hired Yip Sang to write letters for him, and they would pay Yip Sang 25 cents a letter or whatever. So Yip Sang, believe it or not, had a very nice profit from letter writing.
Your dad didn't want your sister to date a Caucasian, but she was a pioneer, wasn't she?
Oh, yeah, she was. Oh, yes. She was actually a first in many respects. When my sister was growing up as a teenager, she joined the Vancouver Sun Teen Club, which I think was called Teen on the Town. And she was so good, apparently, she used to write a column once in a while because she was quite active with the YWCA. But I remember when I was a kid, she used to go to the Vancouver Sun in the old Sun Tower on Pender Street, and she would, write out a column. And one day she entered a contest. It was a fundraiser for the YWCA. And my sister won the contest. It was amazing because what the prize was, it was a 3-month sting as a radio disc jockey on CKMO Saturday afternoon for 1 hour, which was really remarkable because, one, she was the first female disc jockey, two, she was the first Chinese disc jockey, and she loved it. She called the program Jenny's Jukebox. Well, what was remarkable, when my sister left home, she would send me letters with a check. And in these letters, she said, "Oh, Larry, would you mind going down to Chinatown and pick me up these items from the Chinese grocery stores?" So with the check that she sent me, I went down Chinatown and did some shopping for her and mailed them off. I thought, oh, why would she want all these ingredients? Chinese mushroom, Chinese sauce in a bottle. Well, apparently she met this young man in the course of living in a small town in Ontario, and eventually they got married. She was afraid to go back home right away, so she wrote me and she said, "Well, how's Pop? Is he still angry at me?" And I said, "Well, he's starting to cool down a bit." So finally one year they decided to come out. So I told my father, and my father said, "Huh." So what he did was, "Oh, this guy's a low-fat, ha ha ha. If he's expecting a sweet and sour dinner, forget it. I'm gonna cook real village food." So he had salted fish, salted vegetables, because there was a pickle vegetable that we really like, different stuff that you don't find in an ordinary restaurant. So when my sister and brother-in-law came, my dad was very friendly towards Gary, my new brother-in-law. Anyway, my father sort of sat back and said, "Well, I wonder how they're going to react to this real home-cooked dinner." Well, apparently my brother-in-law ate it all up, and my father couldn't understand it. And so he said, "Well, maybe this guy isn't too bad at all." And when he asked Gary, he said, "Well, what do you do for a living?" Gary said, "Well, I'm a butcher." So in my father's line of logic, he thought, well, that's a secure enough job. He should be able to support my daughter. And I think that was the thing that bothered him. Will this Lofan support my daughter? So that was fine. Years later, I asked my sister, "How the hell did you get Gary to eat all that food that Pop prepared, that was village style food that you don't find in a restaurant?" And she said, well, remember those care packages you sent to me? I said, yes. And she said, well, when I was living at home, I remember how Pop cooked. And I remember some of the ingredients he used. That was the list I sent you. So I practiced Chinese cooking with Gary. So by the time we came up to Vancouver, he already loved Chinese food, which was amazing because he has an English background, used to meat and potatoes diet.
What a treat to talk to Larry Wong. He's the author of Dim Sum Stories, A Chinatown Childhood, part of the Gold Mountain Stories series published by the Chinese Canadian Historical Society and working with UBC. We're going to hear more from Larry on Monday's show.
Looking for more CBC podcasts? Go to cbc.ca/podcasting.
Right now, we are going to take you to Vancouver's Chinatown of the 1940s and 50s through the eyes of a child. And this comes to life in a new book from Larry Wong, Dim Sum Stories. It's quite funny, poignant, and very personal. Larry grew up in his father's tailor shop. His mother died when he was just an infant, so his dad raised him with the help of brothers and sisters. And I walked the neighborhood with Larry recently, and we headed for Main and Pender. We're on Main Street, and your dad's tailor shop was nearby.
It's in the middle of that block where the green awning is.
You lived there too, didn't you?
Yes, in the back. And again, this was quite typical of immigrant families who had business. We would live in the back. And I knew several families who ran a grocery store in the front, but they lived in the back. So it was quite common. And the thing with living in the back of the store, they weren't designed for living, period, because first of all, there was no hot water tank. The first thing my father had to do, he would boil a cauldron of water, and with the water, that was how we wash our hands and face in the morning. Also, he used the hot water for making tea, because we had a teapot in a cozy, and the tea would keep warm for pretty well most of the day. So anyway, this was the storefront.
And now it's a barber shop.
It's a barber shop now, yeah. A lot of memorable moments here, because I remember one time I had my father upset at me, and he literally tossed me out of here on the street. I don't know why. I guess it was because I took apart his European-type clock.
2 clocks. Didn't you take apart 2 clocks? Larry, you deserve to be tossed out on the street for that.
Yeah, so it was amazing. So really, Main Street was like my backyard, as it were, you know. This is where I played. The other thing that was interesting about living on the street was that I could go down on Hastings, and at that time there were 2 large bookstores. There were international newsstands. They used to sell newspaper and magazine from all over the world. And the reason for that was for the sailors that came into port. The thing about some of these newsstands, at the very back, through a set of swinging doors, were a number of pool tables. It was a pool hall. They would ignore me at the front, so I would just wander in the back, and I watched these guys playing pool. And anyway, as long as I didn't bother them, you know, they didn't seem to mind, and because I was just a little kid, you know, so I wasn't doing any harm. But that was really, I find, quite fascinating.
And the gambling dens? Were you allowed to go in the gambling dens?
No, not really, because they used to have a lookout man at the front.
We're also standing, you know, pool hall was nearby, but so was the library. And we're looking at the Carnegie Building right now. And how important was that in your life, Larry?
It was a second home for us, because my older siblings, they loved going to the library. For my brother, it was a matter of going there to do his homework. For my sister, she just loves reading. And with that love of reading, she passed it on to me. Like, my sister was 7 years older than me, but she would take me by the hand across the street, and we would go to the children's library. But I remember the first book she introduced me to was about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, and I thought, wow, this is cool. But the other fascinating thing I really loved was this huge model of a ship called the Empress of Asia. It was built by the Canadian Pacific Railway. Now, unbeknownst to me, while I was admiring that model, I was later to find out in life that was the same ship that brought my mother over. And when she died, it brought her home back to Kowloon. It was very poetic, and I was trying to indicate that in my book. But I don't know. Like, was it a coincidence that the model of Asia, Empress of Asia was there and I was attracted to it? And then I found out later that the real Empress of China brought my mother here and then later brought her back to China. I don't know. But it's just one of those coincidences.
Something that I think many of our listeners will find fascinating in the book, we learn that you and Wei San Choi were childhood friends, kindergarten childhood friends. You're
Yes.
both wonderful storytellers, but what was Wei San like as a little guy?
Actually, he was funny. He was really good. We palled around quite a bit. We went to see movies together. We played games together. We went to the library together. But what was interesting, his mother, Sonny, or Wei San as we call him now, would tell his mother all about me. And she was so curious. She actually came down to the shop to meet my father, saying, I'm the mother of Wei San Choi, and I want to find out what kind of father you are. And I think what it was in those old days, it was part of a society where you got to know the parents of your children or the children that you made friends with. And it was a way of getting close within the community and know who your children are going out with.
And your dad took it as a compliment, didn't
Oh,
he?
yes, he did. He certainly did. But the Wei San was a very good friend, and we used to share in a lot of things together.
We're standing at Hastings in Maine, and of course there is so much misery around us too in this neighborhood. And how do you feel about what's happened to your neighborhood, just steps away from where you grew up?
Yeah, that's a shame, really, because when I was growing up, we didn't have that problem. Certainly there were prosecution, there were drug addiction, but they were done behind closed doors. And so the street was quite safe. In fact, when you consider a 6-year-old kid can walk down Hastings Street, go through a newsstand and into the back, into a pool room, I would say that was pretty safe and very secure because I wasn't afraid then. Because I got to know the neighborhood quite well. Yeah, the neighborhood has deteriorated greatly, but gradually it is starting to come back and is becoming more friendly.
Thank you, Larry Wong, the author of Dim Sum Stories.